Hello, everyone. My name is Kori Burkholder, career success coach, and I help people find and land their dream jobs. I work with mid-career professionals who have been doing the same thing for a really long time. They're no longer inspired, they want change, but they have no idea what's next. And so they find me, and I help them figure that out. And today, I'm so excited to be connecting with Jen Narayan. Sorry. And she is amazing. We actually found each other on Instagram when I was looking for a person who could really help people with their resume and their LinkedIn profiles, because once they're done with my program, they're clear on the direction that they want to go, but they might need to reassemble some things to reflect their new career direction. And so Jen is like a superstar when it comes to this. She's the founder of Career Real Talk. She's a resume expert and certified HR leader who works also as a recruiter. So she has this really inside perspective on resumes, because you're looking at them all day, right? And you know what works, what doesn't work. So welcome, Jen. I'm so excited to be talking to you today. Is there anything that you want to say right now to our audience?
I'm just really excited to give back on some, feedback, and hopefully it will help people on their job search moving forward.
Great. So people have so many, different perspectives on resumes and how long they should be or how short they should be, what should be included. So I would love to hear from your perspective. What are your top 3 tips for updating your resume to reflect a career shift?
A career shift. Okay. So one thing I would say is really important for all resumes, but especially important if you're making a career shift, is the professional summary. So back in the day, we would call it the objective maybe, but a professional summary is basically like a mini cover letter. It's an overview of your experience, your education, and more importantly in this case, for a transition, is where you want to move your career moving forward. So this will make it very clear that, perhaps I did stuff like this before, I worked in these environments, but moving forward, I'd like to achieve these goals. And also in a professional summary, you want to make sure you include very clear bullet points that capture the transferable experience, right? So keeping it high level. So say you're moving from, communications to a career coach, talking about the fact that you create plans and you execute accordingly, or, project management or relationship building, things like that. So that would be number 1. And number 2 actually would be the bullet points. So number 1 was the professional summary. So including those, let's say 3 to 5 lines that capture education, experience, and your goals moving forward. And then number 2 would be those bullet points that I mentioned. So maybe it's like 6 to 9 bullet points. You can have it formatted nicely in 3 columns, let's say. And then number 3 would be to, review the experience you had before, and most probably reduce them, and also repurpose, rebrand them to, again, rewrite the sentences in such a way that talk more about the transferable skills that would help you excel in the next job.
Yeah, and I recently went through this process with you just to kind of see how the process goes. And you just made it really easy for me. Like, you were able to see these different things where you could pull out and put into those bullet points. So that was like really helpful for me and kind of like eye-opening. It's like, oh wow, yeah, here's all these transferable skills that I have. And so it's definitely like clear and concise. So I love that. I love that process with you. Great. So those are your top 3 tips. Awesome. So next thing, from a recruiter's perspective, what are your top 3 pet peeves when receiving resumes?
Okay. So my top 3 pet peeves, my number 1 actually is when a resume is super long. So let's say it's 3 pages and beyond. A resume can almost always be 1 to 2 pages. 1 page, let's say if you're 5 years of experience and less, and then 2 pages if it's onwards, right? There are instances where it is acceptable to have 3 pages. Let's say you're a very senior executive, or you extensively work on projects, or you have a highly technical resume. But I would say 9 out of 10 times, I'm always able to make a multiple page resume just down to 1 or 2. So that's my number one pet peeve, when a resume is too long. My number two is when the information is formatted in such a way that it's not as digestible. So usually that could mean very long, chunky sentences, versus bullet points, for example, or just overly wordy. So just too much information would be number two.
Good
And
question. Uh,
sure.
so would that land you in the no pile? So if it's like you have to read the story, they don't get to the point of it really direct. Is it just something like, I don't have time for this right now? Would that be one of the ways to end up in the no pile?
I mean, I wouldn't say that's absolutely a no, but you risk running, or you risk that the person reviewing your resume may not be able to understand it, because oftentimes the person reviewing your resume is the entry level recruiter that maybe hasn't had enough experience to understand all the technical terms, or if it's just too much information. So it does put you in a higher risk to possibly be sort of weaned out.
Okay.
Yeah. So you want to be careful of that. And then number three is when there's no, and I mentioned this earlier, the professional summary. So if there's no professional summary, it's hard for me to understand that, okay, maybe before you were a financial analyst, are you now seeking a senior financial analyst role? Are you now seeking the same position? You want to show that you have some clarity and direction, and a professional summary will really help you do that.
Yeah, because it's just definitely more clear and concise for the person. I mean, you have to keep your audience in mind, right? So when I'm sending you my resume, like I need to have you in mind. Like, what is it going to get me into the yes pile? So I think that's really helpful.
That's a great perspective. Exactly.
Yeah. Great. So I have this group on LinkedIn called Career Tips and Networking. And I posted a question saying, I'm working with this awesome resume writer and strategist. And 2 questions came in from there. So I would love to address these. So one woman reached out and says, how do you describe a career break?
Okay. That's a very good question. It does come up often, and it can create a lot of questions to the reviewer of the resume. So one thing I like to ensure is that my clients always acknowledge the break. Okay. So for example, say you took a career break because you wanted to pursue your education. So obviously you would, I wouldn't make the assumption that the person is going to then see under education that you're now pursuing your MBA, for example. So if your last experience ended in 2017, I would indicate 2018 to present pursuing my master's or my MBA, and then you would see that under education, so it would align. So say, for example, now you're on personal leave, or you're just not working for a more personal reason, I would still acknowledge the gap, or the break rather, just to show that you're not trying to, hide it, or perhaps a recruiter might think, wait, did they miss adding their last job or something like that? So you want to reduce the question marks. So you want to acknowledge the break, and then perhaps put personal leave or caregiver or whatever it is, something very brief and that you're comfortable sharing. And then, keeping in mind that the longer the gap is, it could make it a bit trickier. So if you are doing a job search and you have a career gap, nothing's impossible. You can always find a job, just, working with the right people or coaches to help you along the way. But just making sure that you do practice a lot of active networking, for example.
Yeah. And it reminds me of this woman that called me yesterday, and she is a mom, and she's been out of work for 11 years, and she's wanting to get back into the workforce. Now, she's not exactly sure what she wants to do, but once we figure that out, I mean, there's an 11-year gap.
Okay. Yeah. So for 11 years, I would, again, of course, you're going to acknowledge it, and you're going to provide some context. And in this case, I mean, she did something honorable and admirable. She's taking care of her family. And so people, you'd want to work for an employer that respects that and appreciates that. So, we should be comfortable indicating why we were on 11 years.
Yeah, I love that. It's like you're not trying to hide anything. You want to be transparent about it, and you help how to spin that. Great. So the next question came in, and this one asked, I recently switched from a full-time in-office role as a senior marketing manager to a full-time freelance remote copywriter. I'd be interested to learn the resume essentials that showcase my experience while focusing on my new role as a remote consultant.
Okay. So in this case, again, professional summary is super important. I know I brought it up a few times. So again, making sure that your professional summary talks about the relevant skills, experience, education, and then your goal moving forward. So now, pursuing a career in freelance copywriting, for example. So that would be number one, making sure your professional summary is very clear, and then the bullet points underneath are, again, pulling out the transferable skills. And then number two would be to ensure that you have a tagline. So taglines are sort of a fun thing that I've been using a lot with my clients. They love it. So under that tagline, and what I mean by that is under their name, the tagline would say freelance copywriter, for example. And it shows that although I used to work in corporate, although I used to be a marketing manager, I'm now pursuing a copywriting career moving forward. It makes it very clear. And so that's number two. And then number three is to go through and kind of comb out your responsibilities and reread them from a different perspective, a different, just reframe everything. So you want to reframe it so it talks more high level skills and skills that are going to, again, be relevant to a freelance copywriter. And some of your skills is, I'm not saying to dismiss the skills that aren't directly transferable, but maybe reducing some of that and combining some bullet points together. And again, blowing out the relevant skills.
Yeah. Wow. That's really useful. And it's like there's the theme of the professional summary and just being very clear and concise.
Exactly.
When sending your resume.
Yeah, when you think about being concise, you also think about not being, using too much jargon, because some people might think, well, I'm applying for a job, they're going to understand the jargon. Well, again, your target market is often, the new grad recruiter who may not always be well versed, right? So I'm not saying you can't use, the terms that you're supposed to use, but not necessarily jargon or slang or internal, acronyms, for example, that other companies may not understand.
Right. What about industry buzzwords?
I think industry buzzwords are great. Okay. I would use that.
Okay, great. Well, this has been so helpful. I mean, we could talk probably hours on this topic.
I know I could.
I know. And I am just so pleased to, be working with you and to empower my clients to really take that next step and get to work with you. And yeah, and Jen's website is careerrealtalk.com if you want to check her out. And thank you for your time today.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, Kori.
Bye.